Bonjour class. Today we are going to talk about adverbs and how to form adverbs and where adverbs are placed. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in. So first off, qu'est-ce qu'un adverbe? So what is an adverb? An adverb is a word that modifies a verb. So think of like an adjective is a word that modifies something that you're talking about. And an adverb just modifies the verb. So in English, an example would be, I am talking loudly, or I am talking quietly. So usually an adverb in English is something that ends in ly. Il y a 4 types de verbes. So there are 4 different types of adverbs. There are short adverbs. There are adverbs of frequency that talk about how often or how not often you do something. There are day-specific adverbs like today, tomorrow, the day after next. And then there are long adverbs like rarely, slowly, and those things. So let's talk about those specific types of adverbs. So adverbs I already talked about in English usually end in ly. So j'ai 3 exemples. I have 3 examples. So he drove slowly, she runs quickly, and they speak softly. And you can see how slowly, quickly, and softly are all describing how they drove, how they ran, or how they spoke. So you've already learned a couple adverbs. You've heard me say a couple adverbs. You've heard me talk about souvent, which means often, and de temps en temps, which means from time to time. Then we have rarement, which means rarely, régulièrement, which means regularly, and toujours is one that I don't think you've heard me say before, but that means always. So adverbs in French usually end in ment, which is equivalent to the ly in English that I've talked about before. So to take an adverb and make it French, or a way to acknowledge that that it is an adverb, is to see that ment onto the end. So how to form them? You first have to take the adjective in the masculine form, and then transition it into the feminine form. So we went from sérieux to sérieuse. And then to make it an adverb, all we have to do is add ment onto the end. So we take sérieuse and add ment, and we end up with sérieusement. And that means seriously. So you can take an adjective, transition it into the feminine, and then add ment to make it an adverb. So, quel est l'adverbe? Transformer les adjectifs. So this is the part that I want you to kind of make sure that you've got some notes on. So here's some examples. We have généreux with the masculine. The feminine is généreuse. And then all I did to make it an adverb was add ment. So I've got généreusement. And so généreusement means generously. Then we have méchant, which means mean. And méchante is the feminine. So méchantement, it means meanly. Like, oh, you did that so meanly. Next, we have créatif is the masculine, and créative is the feminine. So créativement means creatively. Like, oh, she made a book creatively, or she wrote a book creatively. And timide stays the same for both masculine and feminine, so that one's pretty easy. And it becomes timidement, which means shyly. Like she shyly walked up to the board to write the answer on the board. So there are some irregulars in French, as always. The 2 big ones are bon and mauvais. They don't follow the same rule of just adding ment onto the end. They have a completely different form. So bon changes to bien, and mauvais changes to mal. So for an example, you could say, I play the piano well. And you would say, je joue du piano bien. Now, placement. Most adverbs in French will usually get placed after the verb. So I have 3 exemples. I have 3 examples. I have je joue mal au tennis, so I play tennis badly. Je fais souvent du sport. I often do sports. And vous jouez bien de la batterie. So you play the drums well. Most of the time, adverbs are going to come after the verb in French. And just like I said earlier, there are some irregulars. So some adverbs are only going to come at the beginning or the end of a sentence. And this slide, I want to talk specifically about day-specific adverbs. So exemple is demain, which means tomorrow, and aujourd'hui, which means today. So we have demain, je vais jouer au tennis. Tomorrow, I'm going to play tennis. And il va à l'école aujourd'hui. So you wouldn't take your sentence and say, je vais jouer demain au tennis. I'm going to play tomorrow tennis. So you usually say that at the beginning or the end. And for the premier exemple, for the first example, you could say, je vais jouer au tennis demain. And you can put it either at the begin or the end. And the same thing for the second example, you could say, aujourd'hui, il va à l'école. Today he is going to school. But just know that day-specific adverbs are only going to come at the beginning or the end of the sentence. They won't ever come in the middle. Also, long adjectives are usually going to be placed at the beginning or the end just because they're so long. So we have malheureusement. So usually any adjectives that end in ment are going to come either beginning or end of the sentence. So malheureusement, which means unfortunately or sadly. So malheureusement, il ne trouve pas son téléphone. So sadly, he did not find his phone. You could say, il ne trouve pas son téléphone malheureusement. He did not find his phone, unfortunately. And the deuxième exemple, the second example, is j'écoute de la musique rarement. So I listen to music rarely. You could say rarement j'écoute de la musique. Rarely do I listen to music. But it just depends on what your adverb is and what your sentence is. Most of the time, they'll be placed at the end, and sometimes they'll be placed at the beginning.